Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Missing Link. I'm here with a lady who I met many years ago in my introduction into the world of compliance, Gillian Bristow. How are you, Gillian?
I'm really good, thank you, Bruce.
Thanks so much. This was very sort of ad hoc the way this happened, wasn't it? I just happened to be on the phone to you and said, I'd love you to come onto this. And you said, and I said, when are you in Sydney next? And you said, oh, I'm actually here at the moment. And so it was only a couple of days ago we had that conversation, and here we are. Gillian, I think you're an amazing person with what you do. I'm going to sing a little bit of a praise here, and I want to tell the listeners and the viewers how we first met. So I just asked you just on the way here when I picked you up from the station if you remember this, and you didn't, but it was vivid in my memory that I was at it was a Nat Road conference, I'm pretty sure, down in Adelaide. And you'd gotten up and spoken, and I was infatuated with the way that you spoke and what you talked about, because I've always been interested in that legal side and are we doing the right thing, are we not doing the right thing? And I was very new into compliance at the time. And I came and spoke to you afterwards, and you were so happy to stop and have a chat. And I said, I just would love your opinion on this. I said, we were talking about training, and I said, when it comes to government training and a TLIF course, I said, I've been delivering some load restraint training, which is just so generic and it's not relevant to what this company does. I think that you'd be better off doing a tailored training that was specific to that company and what they did. Would that stand up better in court? And you said to me, would you have an assessment at the end? And I said, yes, definitely have an assessment at the end. And he said, well, that is definitely the way to go. It would have far more stead if you ended up on a legal side of it. And I was relieved. And then you asked me what my background was and what I was doing and how long I'd been doing this. And I said, I'm only new to it. And I told you my background. And he said, please tell me there's other people out there doing that have got your expertise. Expertise being experience in the industry. You didn't realise at the time, you didn't even remember the conversation. But for me, as a guy who was just starting into this world of compliance, which is so big, and we never realised how big it was at the time. But it was the greatest influential discussion that I could have had, and it's something that sat with me all this time. And we've run into each other many times and spoken many times. I've come up to a couple of courses that you've done, and you're still there. I think one time I said to you, hey, I'm going up to Cairns. Are you going? You said yes. I said, if I take you out for a drink, would you be able to have a talk to me and ask some questions? You said, if you give me wine, I'll answer whatever you want, which was fantastic. So we've had a really good relationship, and I've just loved it because we need that hope and we need that help. And you've been able to help us in many ways. So that's our little intro about how Gillian and I met. So you're from Gillian Legal, I beg your pardon, Bristow Legal. So I'm nervous sitting in front of you. So Bristow Legal, please tell us about your background and how you got into doing and where I suppose everyone's got their specialty, don't they? So you've got some areas there that you really specialise in transport.
Yeah, so I've been out on my own as Bristow Legal with a couple of lawyers working with me for just over 7 years. But before that, I worked for large firms and for a small firm. I started, I guess, morphing towards transport as a specialty in the early 1990s. My original plan was that I wanted to do maritime law. So I was really into the shipping side of things. And one of the reasons for that is it's really black letter law. I don't enjoy the sorts of law where it's all about the vibe. So the kind of family law stuff and that was never my cup of tea. I always wanted to do stuff that had proper law in it, where there were judgments and decisions that you could sort of pour your way through. And maritime law is very like that. But unfortunately, if you're a lawyer starting out in Brisbane, there's just not that much of that sort of work around. And so somehow, and I'm not quite sure exactly how, my kind of focus on shipping morphed into being a focus on road transport. And in the beginning, a lot of it was because there were some changes in the law in Queensland in the early 1990s to get rid of some old legislation that limited the liability of carriers per load. So it was basically ditched. And so carriers were left in a position where the only way that they could manage their liability was to have those terms and conditions on the back of, in those days, were triplicate copies of consignment notebooks. And so I started to be introduced to various transport companies just because they needed that work done. And then I guess over the sort of 30 plus years since then, it's just kind of expanded to the point where I don't do anything except act for transport and logistics operators. Probably in the last 10 years or so, I've had a lot more of a focus on contracts especially, because once upon a time, maybe even 10 years ago, I would have said 90% of contracts, even large ones, were handshake. You know, we've done this work for 40 years plus, and we know the people, they know us, they like us. What do you mean? Why do we need a contract? But I think all of that's changed, partly because of chain of responsibility and the need to document, but also we've just become a much more, compliance-based industry, full stop, and contracts are seen as part of that compliance piece. And I would say now, as a result, about maybe 50 to 60% of what I would do in any one week would be related to contracts, either subcontracts or contracts between major customers, mining companies, retailers, manufacturers, etc., and their transport operators. And I guess that's made me very familiar with that sort of side of things and how that then flows into people's businesses and what effects that has on how they operate their business and how they allocate resources.
We always say about reading the fine print, but I suppose if someone gets a contract that they have to sign rather than just signing it, you should be giving it to a lawyer to check it, shouldn't you? Because a lot of us wouldn't know what's in there and just if we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot by signing or not.
I think the thing with contracts is that nobody actually cares what's written in there until something goes wrong. I can honestly say that if your customer says to you, I'll need to check the contract, you've probably got a problem because you've reached the point where you're not talking anymore. You're wanting to go back to, what did we actually agree when you signed that thing I sent you 4 years ago? So I'm not saying that you can't function well without a contract because people will tell you they have. They'll say, I've been going for 20 years and I've never had a contract and I've never had a problem. But when you have a problem, that's when you'll be sorry if A, you don't have a contract, or B, you have a contract that you don't know what's in it and nothing is good for you in that document that you've never read before.
Yeah, that you haven't read before, yeah.
Yes.
So you have something. And also, when we spoke on the phone the other day, we were talking about using somebody else's contract, and because plagiarising is very big in compliance. It's probably very big in everything there, but we've gone into places where we'll see someone and they've got, let's say, a safety management system or documents of some sort, and they've even got the old company's name in there. We've seen one that someone had brought along with them there who'd worked for one of the local councils and had brought along their safety management system there, and it was talking about garbage collection and all of that sort of stuff. And they just put their name on it and obviously hadn't read a thing. So when it comes to a contract, if there's been a contract between two parties there, where do you stand when it comes to that? Is there a legality there?
Oh, absolutely. If you want to put forward a contract and someone signs it, it's a deal. It may or may not be suitable, but good luck trying to unpack that later on when something goes wrong. And if I could just add a little story on the end of that, Bruce, about you mentioning that people misusing contracts. I actually have a course that I run that goes for a whole day with respect to transport contracts, and I get the participants to work through a contract that has multiple problems in it. The idea being that you learn to recognise things you shouldn't agree to. And I watermark the document that I provide, do not use. I have actually seen someone who, it wasn't someone who attended one of my courses, use that document as the template for their contract with a customer. That's kind of like the whole point of it was to put every possible bad thing in it.
And they still used it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know where they even got it from, but the difficulty is that exactly what you said is what tends to go on. And if you copy something that's really good, maybe it's not bad. But do you actually have the wherewithal to understand when you're choosing which one to copy, which one is a good idea? Aside from the copyright problems, of course.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah. So where does that lead you when it comes to AI?
I think that's also one of the awkward things is that AI has its place, but I would be very uncomfortable asking ChatGPT or Copilot to write me a contract without knowing from whose point of view they're writing it. Because the thing is, contracts tend to be written for the benefit of the person who's putting them forward. So
fair
obviously,
enough.
if you're the big mining company, then you're going to want provisions in that contract that, to the extent that you can do so, kind of nail down your transport provider. You want to make sure that they're promising you the earth, that they're not limiting their liability, that if something goes wrong, like a force majeure event, that they're going to have to do everything possible to get your goods there on time. So effectively, you're pushing as much responsibility on that transport provider as you can. And so if you ask AI to generate a contract, do you really understand from whose point of view they're looking at this?
Yeah, that's fair enough. Because I would have thought that a contract really was more, I suppose, just even Stevens there. But you're right, what you're saying there. You're going to be making sure, excuse me, if I'm having the contract done from my behalf, it's giving me all the get out of jail free sections there.
Yeah. Yeah, so you would expect, for example, that a contract that was generated for the benefit of that high-level customer, you'd expect them to be able to get out very easily if they don't like how it's going, but they want you to be locked in because they don't want you at short notice escaping the contract. Whereas if you're the transport operator, that's not how you want it to play. You want to have some ability as well to flex and to get out if you're unhappy or the service has become unprofitable and you don't want to be locked in.
Yeah. That'd boil down to things such as job descriptions and everything as well, because I suppose they're in agreement. So, and you had said to me earlier that an agreement is a contract. And so if there's a job description there, when people go into a role, especially going higher than a driver, and so they're going in a role where there's some responsibility, they've got to be careful of what's written in there and make sure that what it says you're going to be doing, not just sign it at the end and say, oh, here's your contract and sign it. And all they're looking for is how many annual leave days do I get? And oh, wow, I've got a company car, but you don't tend to read anything else.
That's true, yeah.
Because when we see a notice come through from the regulator, they ask for, this particular person here in this role, we want a copy of their job description. So they're obviously looking at who's responsible.
Because they're trying to work out who
who they're going to prosecute.
Well, pretty much, yeah.
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 So that's frightening in a way, because I think even job descriptions get shared around fairly well between people, but and it's all right, I suppose, to have it as a template. But you go through and actually have a really good look at what's in there. But when it comes to chain of responsibility or the heavy vehicle national law, just where your liabilities lie and what's on you and what's not.
And interestingly, quite a few of those contracts that come from large companies, they do try to, I guess, put a lot of the COR risk onto the operator. So they'll say the operator has to comply with COR and has to do bang, 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 bang. And nowhere does it say they're going to comply or what they're going to do as part of being in that chain and being responsible.
Yeah, right. And then there's also the bit about where they say that contracts aren't allowed to have where there's going to be a monetary value for you, not allowed to encourage you in speeding or breaking the law, etc. And there's not allowed to be anything there that will turn around and say that you're going to be, what's the word?
Like incentivized.
By we're not going to fine you if you're late, etc.
Yes.
Now, an interesting thing, I'd love to throw this one at you, is that we've dealt with a couple of companies out there who are asphalt companies. So they're doing roads and doing work. They're doing government work. They're doing work for local councils and that type of thing, where they're opening up roads. They have in there that in their contractual arrangements, that if they keep a road open into, say, peak times, so they've been working through the night, but if they don't have that road ready to use by peak times, they start getting fined. Oh, we've seen it there. They get fined $20,000 every 15 minutes.
Every 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you've got that, that's basically forcing them to, you could argue that that's forcing them to break the law, couldn't you?
Yeah, you could argue that provides them with an incentive to work while fatigued or to speed. And in fact, there is some regulatory advice along those lines that the NHVR has put out that's on their webpage.
So we've got government organisations that are actually providing what other government organisations are saying don't do. Yeah. That's a bit frightening, isn't it?
Well, I think there's a general lack of understanding of some of those provisions as well, because I think sometimes there's a disconnect between whoever in the organisation is writing those sorts of contracts, where they've got a really big interest in a project being finished on time or goods being there on the dot, as opposed to the people further down the line who perhaps have a better understanding of what the chain of responsibility implications might be.
Yeah, right. Golly, it's scary, isn't it? Like there's just a massive can of worms that can get open quite easily when it comes to that. So when you've got, let's say a company's entering into a contractual basis there, do you counteract with a contract back to them?
No, you would normally go back and say, here's the areas that we're not happy with. So you might, for example, say, you've said we can't subcontract without your prior written consent. Well, guess what? The way it works for us is we would only use a subcontractor if it's urgent. Do you really want a call at sort of 10 p.m. at night to say our regular driver's not good to do this? Can we engage a subcontractor? Or are you prepared to amend that clause so that we can subcontract without needing to get your prior written consent at, like I said, some unearthly hour of the night? And so often you'll find that there will be an ability to flex on those sorts of contracts. So the context in which you might be seeking those changes, there's usually two different scenarios. One is where you're responding to a request for quotation or a tender.
Yeah.
And what will happen in that scenario is you'll get like this bundle of documents. So you've probably got literally scores and scores of pages saying, tell us about your business, tell us about your capabilities and your fleet and your policies and your modern slavery and all of those environmental stuff. And then there'll be a tab that says, and if you win this and we like your price and you're the best, then this is the agreement that we want you to sign up to. You better speak up now if this isn't going to suit you. And I will often be reviewing in that context that there's a tender and you've got to, as part of that, say, my price is based on how I want this contract to look. And I'm not having a contract, for example, that has no fuel levy in it. My prices will need to be varied.
Right, yeah. Well, that's very relevant at the moment.
Yes,
yeah. And interestingly, talking to a few companies around, a lot of them have got a fuel levy built in, but it's only a small amount or a percentage. And then you get others there, like guys doing stuff like earthworks, just doing excavation work. They don't have anything built in at all, and they're bleeding.
No.
Yeah, in a big way.
And the other issue as well is you might have signed up via one of a tender like this for a contract that's got no price review in it. And when you're running at inflation rates of, 2 or 3%, that may be neither here nor there. Although, to be fair, in transport, margins are so small that it usually is a problem. But you can imagine in the current environment where we're pushing to much higher inflation figures, that having a 5-year contract that says your prices are fixed for 5 years is just a bit of a problem.
Yeah, right, right. You would have seen some pretty ugly things happen over the years when it comes to contractual arrangements there. I know you can't name companies and all of that sort of thing, but can you give some examples of particular stories that like listeners would relate to who are in transport operations, to let them know some of the things, to help it sort of relate to them in a layman's terms? Because I think that there's all sorts of stuff that's written, but a lot of the time when we do training there, when the experience that we've had, how we grow, delivering compliance to people, the way that we grow is because we've seen something happen and we learn from it every single day. And we've gone to court and you've seen people get grilled and you see things happen to them that you wouldn't expect was going to happen, but you realise how strict they get when you go in front of a judge.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess over the sort of 30 years that I've been involved in this, a lot of what I've done is educated by having seen people's problems, which is as you said, it's not an ideal way of learning for anyone. But one of the things you do is you continue to refine what you want in contracts and what you've seen go wrong. So some of the things that I think are most critical, one is the sad story that happens when someone has signed up to a contract based on the term of it. So just imagine that you've got a large, I'm just going to say a large retailer, for example, who offers you a contract. You're required to provide whatever services they want. So you have no out at all for 4 years. But somewhere in that contract, it says they have a right to terminate, just them, not you, a right to terminate for convenience with 30 days notice. So you get all excited, you break open the champagne, you go buy a whole heap of brand new vehicles, put on new drivers, you've say got 20 new vehicles and 20 new drivers, and you're a year into this, and there's a change of management or a change of plan, and someone from the big company goes and reads the contract and says, we've decided to insource. We're not doing this anymore. Here's your notice, 30 days, you're done. And all of a sudden you've got vehicles with no work. You've got drivers you have to make redundant. You've got a mortgage over your house for all of that. And you have no rights at all because you signed that. You said at any time you can give me 30 days notice. So you've thought in your head, because you haven't read the fine print, you've got a 4-year deal and you've invested on that basis. But you don't. You really have a 30-day contract.
That's scary.
It is scary and it's horrible and it's happened to people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really frightening. And that comes down again to just not having, you should have a professional go over that contract, shouldn't you?
Yes.
And point these things out and say,
Yes.
do you realise that they could terminate this at any time?
Yes.
Just because they want to, but you can't, but they can.
Yes. And sometimes it's even more subtle than that, in the sense that you might have a contract that just says you're going to provide transport services as requested from time to time for 4 years. And you've got in your head what you think you're going to get requested to do. But somewhere in the fine print, again, it says we may or may not ever give you any requests. And so instead of even
Right.
giving you the notice, the work just dries up. They just go, don't turn up tomorrow. And you go, what do you mean? And they go, well, I'm not making a request.
Yeah, okay. You could lose everything very very
could.
quickly, couldn't you?
Yes.
We always say it's from an accident. You could lose
Yes.
something very, very quickly and getting prosecuted. But just this type of thing is something that could really bring you undone.
Yes. And you hope it never happens. And for most people, it probably doesn't. But it can.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does. And I think the other time that I see this come home in a particularly, I guess, scary way for people is transport operators who sign a contract based on a relationship. They're like, I've always dealt with X. He's a great guy. We've got this fabulous relationship. I'm not concerned by what's in the contract because he hasn't read it, I haven't read it, but I know we'll be fine. And that works until he isn't there anymore. And all of a sudden, some new person comes in, reads the contract and says, guess what? This has not been done correctly. We're going to do it this way as per the contract from now on. And guess what? You're not getting that allowance that you've been getting that isn't in the contract. Or, we're going back to actually read it and what you're going to be doing is different to what you thought and different to what you and the ex-manager were doing.
That could even boil down to you as an employee, couldn't it?
Yeah, I guess.
With going in and working somewhere and you get a few bonuses there by one of the managers and then the one goes and goes, like, we're going to give you free fuel for your car and we're going to give you a fuel card and we're going to, provide this, that or the other. And then all of a sudden they just take that off you and say, well, you're not actually entitled to that.
I think the employee piece is probably not as much of a worry, only because, and this is not my area.
So that's more personal, then, isn't it?
I'm kind of sort of drifting out of my kind of area of expertise. But employees have more protection because that they've got the Fair Work Commission and they have
Fair
all
enough,
that
yeah,
unfair
yeah.
termination and that sort of thing. Whereas transport companies don't have easy access to those sorts of protections. They're considered to be, able to look after themselves because they're businesses. And if you come to a court and say, well, I didn't read the contract because I thought it would be okay, you're not going to get a good reception. You're not going to get a judge who says, well, that's okay then. Whatever you thought was going to happen, I'm sure that's good. And that's how I'm going to make a decision. They're going to say, guess what? That's the contract, you signed it. You're going to need a pretty good reason to sort of vary from that.
Yeah, yeah. When we've seen people go in there and they've painted their trucks into a company's colours, so they've managed to get a gig and they've gone and the company says, oh, we'll pay for the paint work on your vehicles, or we'll pay 50%. That's another thing that I've seen happen where they don't say anything about taking it back out of the colours once it's all over, and so companies or individuals are stuck with that. Whether it's a single vehicle or whether they've got a 6-truck operation, but they're suddenly stuck with that.
Yes.
Is that something that's also good to make sure it's put in there? Yeah, it's simple stuff really, isn't it?
Yes. And you want to think about all of those sorts of issues. The other thing is sometimes no one's thought about stuff. Like, for example, during COVID, all of a sudden we were all scrambling and looking at force majeure clauses in contracts. And just for the benefit of the listeners, force majeure is some silly French word that basically means, an event outside your control.
Right.
But I mean, I'd been practicing law for decades, and it's just one of those clauses that, everyone chucks one in there, but you never read it because you never think that that's all that relevant.
Yeah,
and all of a sudden we had this, event that was unthinkable in terms of the effect that it had on the industry and, how easy it was or wasn't to get from one place to another, whether there were AdBlue shortages and, all the things that affected transport operators. Now you would never read a contract without having a serious look for, what the circumstances are that constitute a force majeure event, just because we've all kind of learnt from
the
that.
world's never gone back to pre-COVID normal, really, has it?
No,
Yeah.
no.
And Uncle Donald's sort of having a bit to do with that at the current state. So,
Well, I mean, again, fuel levies.
Yeah.
People have probably never read their fuel levy before, and it was just assumed that someone else was going to calculate it and it would be fine, as suddenly scrambling around going, what is the AIP?
oh boy, yeah. It's so many variables, and see, this is really foreign to me. Is this contractual side of it? And I'm sure with a lot of companies it is, unless they've got someone in there. Maybe they've got a business partner or someone in there who has an accountancy background at least would sort of have an understanding going, we probably need to look at doing this.
Yes.
Especially with a major player. How does it get really ugly when they start playing with some of like the big, I'm going to, as an example, the Woolworths and the Coles and the Aldis and those big players there. Does that something that that a driver or a company owner who's putting X amount of vehicles in there has to be very careful, because they would have big legal teams that would have that stuff bulletproof too, wouldn't they?
Oh, pretty much all of the big operators have standard form contracts. A lot of them have actually improved over the last few years, because what happened in Australia is at the end of 2023, we had new laws passed that extend, I'm getting really technical here, sorry, the unfair contract terms provisions in federal law to small business contracts. And so a small business under those laws is anyone with under 100 employees or a turnover of under 10 million. And so you're now not allowed in a standard form contract that you're entering into with a small business to have unfair terms. And if you do, there's potential fines, etc. So a lot of those big contracts have actually been revised since that time, and a lot of them are gentler and they're more equal. So you're less likely to see some of those one-way, we can get out in 30 days, but you're locked in for 5 years type of terms in some of those standard form contracts.
Right. And should they, when you say that they're a 4-year contract, but should they have a review every 12 months, as a quick review, or if it's 4 years, it's 4 years?
Sometimes that's good for a transport operator because they feel secure, because obviously you're not thinking, my work's drying up, it's going back to market after 12 months.
It's a lot looking in the interest rates with the bang for your house, isn't it? And you just got to think, oh, good, we've got a little safety net there for a while.
So if it's a good contract and you've got it for a good length of time, then that's happy days. And sometimes that's helpful for you too, because if you're trying to borrow money from the bank and the bank says, how can I be sure that you're going to have work for your trucks? And you go, well, I've got no contracts.
Okay.
So there can be a distinct benefit in being able to show you've got long-term written arrangements with people. So it's like everything. It can be really good, but if what you've got is a long-term agreement that's awful, where you're locked into providing services where you're losing money, well, obviously that's not a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. What about, I know you've had a bit to do with workers' comp as well. And when you have people that, drivers get injured, because this is probably another thing that I suppose is similar from that legal perspective. And we see it a lot where we could go into a company and you'll see a driver, and there's a lot that are genuine. I was over having a look at a wrecked truck yesterday, and I'd been involved with the legal side of that. I had to go in as an expert witness as to the reason this truck had rolled over, and they were trying to get basically shafted and say it was driver error, and I'm going, well, no, it actually wasn't. It was the way that it was loaded, and it wasn't let out of the truck to have a look. So there's a lot of variables when they looked in there, and the solicitor there didn't actually understand transport and how it works, so they really relied on my background. But when it comes to workers' comp or, injuries or anything like that, is there particular things where an employee needs to be very wary of what they do? Because what I'm saying is we've gone into places, an employer or an employer, we've gone into places where someone's gone off and you just think this guy is taking the mickey. Absolutely full of it. There is no way that that's happened, and you see people that bleed the system. My hatred of that is that the genuine people get caught up in that. So when you have a look at even third-party personal injury and someone's there and they're literally just faking that they've got an injury of some sort, but the genuine people are struggling with it there. Where is there any escape from that, or you really just are just going to be caught up in that as a company owner regardless?
Well, I think that whole area of workers' comp is quite problematic because you don't actually have control of it. It's the insurer that ultimately decides whether a claim is legitimate or not. So I guess the only way you can protect yourself is to have good policies, have good procedures, have the evidence the best way you can to establish whether an event did or didn't occur, etc. And the other big issue now, of course, for workers' comp schemes generally is mental health claims, because they are now representing a very large part of the spend in the workers' comp space as well.
Yeah,
so
right.
That's another thing that I think has changed a lot over the kind of decades that I've been involved. Is once upon a time, none of us acknowledged any of that, and I'm sure it's not that there weren't potential claims for it. It's just we didn't really have the recognition of that, and yeah.
But that's coming in with the new SMS and the fitness to drive,
Yes.
and I mean, there's a hell of a lot of people out there that are probably suffering from post-traumatic stress, especially truck drivers who have been first responders.
Yes.
And so they're treated for it and they've got a medication. Is it going to be done the same way like sleep apnea, where you go into a medical and you can go on to BFM or whatever and you can have sleep apnea, but as long as you're tested and they can see that it's been treated? Do you reckon that's going to be the same, where they're going to say, well, as long as you're on medication? Because how many people out there have been going through a traumatic incident, have gone through, like I say, first responders is the first thing I think of, because I'm very open on Copy Southbound about mental health issues that I've struggled with over the years and post-traumatic stress. And we get a lot of people who have come to us and said, mate, and it seems to be first responders. They've turned up, they've been there, they've been involved in a fatality, they jump out there in the middle of nowhere, they go over to the car and there's someone who's just been broken in pieces and they see that. And then we're not trained for that. And so they struggle with that and it affects them.
I don't think it matters if you've been trained or not. I mean,
well,
it obviously
emergency
helps
services
if you
struggle
can
with it
do
eventually.
exactly.
So they eventually have a breaking point and everyone does. But for people that haven't been
Yes.
trained, I think it's horrible. And so you realise that that's a really, really big thing. But when you have that happen, there's a lot of people who are going to be getting treated for that and go to a psychologist regularly or just deal with it themselves. Where are they going to draw a line? Where's the NHVR going to draw a line with that?
I don't know.
People that are going through divorces, someone who might have lost a child in or anything.
Because we're all human.
We are.
And life happens.
And everyone's got something going on.
Yeah.
And some people deal with it better than others. And some people do struggle with it and need help with it there. And there's a lot of people who are on the edge, but it's almost like they're saying, well, if you've got a mental health issue, there's a chance that you might try and take out your frustrations and run your truck into someone and kill them. And therefore that needs to be looked after. They're going to delete 2/3 of the industry, I reckon, by doing that. We're not going to have any drivers anywhere. I don't understand how that's going to work.
I don't know. I think that we're going to have to wait and see on that. Because I agree with you. It's that humans aren't robots.
That's just opening Pandora's box, though, isn't it? By turning around and saying we're going to touch on that subject, and I'm.
But can you not touch on it? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Well, I suppose that you have to, but it's kind of like this, and we'll throw this into the equation as well, because that's probably an issue. But it's kind of like turning around, even when you look at what the NHVR has done with the new safety management systems and transitions. I think they've gone along and said, yep, this will work and this will work and this will work and this will work. But then when the industry gets involved again, hang on, none of those things will work without you doing 200 other things, and they've realised, oh, God, this is bigger than we thought. The NHVAS switchover has been one of them there. So I think that I just feel as though they've jumped into that area there, and it's kind of like, well, you've got to assess your own risk. how does a company do that? So when you look at risk assessments, and they're very clear that you've got to assess your own risk on pretty much everything, correct? So a lot of people don't know how to do a risk assessment in the first place without having some sort of an advice on it there. But that's getting
complicated.
That's getting really touchy when you start getting into that, because you've got bigger organisations that are controlled by industrial activities, so they've got unions involved and that sort of thing. You're going to say you can't ask that because that is an invasion of privacy. And to a lot of people, that will be an invasion of privacy. I mean, drivers don't like having a camera looking at them, let alone having to turn around and prove that they're getting treated for any sort of a mental health issue. I just don't know how that can be managed by anyone from the person themselves, let alone right through the company up to the NHVR.
No, you're right. It's complicated. Very complicated.
So you can't enlighten me on that at all. I was really hoping you could.
I wish there was an easy answer
I'm very
to that.
frightened by what that's going to introduce in the industry. And also the things such as, if a driver states that he has a migraine headache, you have to allow him to pull over. Now, there's a lot of guys out there that will work through a migraine, and I'm one of them, but there's going to be a lot of people that are going to milk it. And I hate to say, but this industry is full of that. And there's people that are just going to take advantage of these situations.
You're very cynical, Bruce.
No, well, I'm. You know what? I'm actually quite optimistic in so many ways, but we've just seen too much, Gillian, and you have too. But we've just seen this sort of thing happen there, and you see a lot of stuff. I mean, I just get concerned.
You think it pushes it too far one way?
Well, I think that it's. Yeah, I do. I think that it's mollycoddling too much, and I think that they're making it too easy for people to turn around and say we're going to take advantage, and therefore it's going to hurt the industry. Yeah. It's going to hurt companies because people are going to have it. And I've been into places there where you see someone who is just milking it. I worked at a place that every day this particular driver's next sick day was due. We didn't allocate a truck for him because we knew that he would be off that day because it was due. And he said, they're my sick days, I'm entitled to them. So when you see people that actually do that, and I never thought that would have happened because I wouldn't do it. No. I've never chucked a sickie in my life. So I'm not used to that. But this guy's, nope, I'm going to take my sick day.
This is my right.
Yeah.
It's my leave.
Exactly. That's what he looked at it. We're entitled to that. So he would take that day. And when I went in, I said about this particular guy, and I said about allocating, don't bother putting anything to it next to his truck on Monday. Why not? He'll be off sick. What do you mean he'll be off sick? And this is the first I was exposed to it. One of my first allocations jobs. And it happened.
You see, Bruce, this is
so
why
probably I am cynical, but when you see that, I start thinking, oh no, don't go fueling any of that stuff, you know, and that's what I think that they're going to do is they're going to make it so much easier for that.
So you see, this is all the reasons why I like my black letter law and not all that industrial relations stuff.
I think because, as you said before,
there's so many grey areas in that.
But because there is, but because there's so much, as you said, there's no margin in transport.
No,
it's very small. There's so much outlay for such a small amount of financial reward, and I think that it's getting tougher and tougher. There's more and more things that are getting put in place, and they're really getting held to ransom. And I also hate the fact that the guys that are running line haul and doing the long distance stuff there are scrutinised on the side of the road constantly. But so many of the running trucks that are just as big running around local don't get stopped doing anything.
Well, the system's not there to supervise it in the same way as it is for that long distance.
So it's kind of like, well, the regulator's going, well, let's just keep going for that low-hanging fruit because they're the easiest ones to get, but they need to get them on the side of the road locally and start having a look at companies, but they just can't. They just don't have the resources to do it.
And that's the problem with any complex system of laws is it's only as good as the ability to enforce it. And as soon as you aren't enforcing it, then people go, well, I don't, why would I bother? Because if no one's going to check up on it, then it's not really a law, is it? Because it's not being actually policed, and so people then think, well, why am I bothered?
Well, it comes down to overspeeds. You can have a tracker, and we've been into companies there, and we've seen them where they're dropping them to over 120 because they're letting them go loaded beat up was running downhill. But they just go, oh, we can't stop them from doing it. Do you say anything to them? No, we don't bother. Well, they're going to keep doing it then because it's the squeakiest wheel gets the oil. So that they have to be saying something, otherwise the drivers will keep doing it. If they know they're getting watched, they do start pulling it back.
Yes.
But
That's human nature.
Well, it is, yeah. If no one say anything to you, you just sort of keep going there. And it's convenient when you're driving to let it go downhill. And it is, but, the speed limit's 100 and that's what they focus on. So when you're in trouble, they'll go back and look at all of those things.
And they'll say, look how long this has been going on for.
Yeah. And how come you're not addressing it? Do you have a process? Do you have a procedure, etc.?
Yes.
And you've been in court plenty of times, so you would have seen how strict they get and how many hairs they split when they're going through it, right down to wording and everything.
Yes.
Which is the frightening bit.
Yes. Because everything's okay until it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you've been involved with companies where there's been a fatality, and that tends to be when it really goes pear-shaped and they really get investigated, how hard have you seen them go? Like, do you find that it's ramped up a bit? Because from my point of view, in the last 10 years, it's gotten tougher and tougher and tougher. With the way that the companies are investigated and with what they look at. Because I've spoken to people and said, mate, I was involved with the fatality 20 years ago and we never went through any of this bullshit. You're full of it. Yeah. But I've seen it get harder and harder. Have you noticed that pattern?
I think that's probably the right approach by the regulator because by definition, if somebody dies, it's a big deal. And if you, for example, were to read the enforcement policies of the NHVR, they make it clear that obviously they have limited resources. So, of course, they're going to focus on circumstances where there's been a major event, either a fatality or a very, very close to a fatality. And as a society as well, I think our tolerance around risk has reduced. And I mean, we didn't have industrial manslaughter laws, for example, 20 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And we do now. So there is very much a focus on everyone has a right to come home safely. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
No,
I would rather see resources being dedicated to potential obvious failings than see, a focus on whether or not people have correctly signed the bottom of their work diary pages. To me, that's a much better.
Don't start there.
Yeah.
That's a pet hate of mine. There is that fact that the fines there. I think they're up. That top section now is up to $880, and just for a clerical error there with not ticking a box. And it's like, come on, that's just crazy. But that's what they just keep putting it up. We keep challenging it, and they keep putting it up. And I hope in some of these new reforms they do say that that's getting looked at, and they're looking at pulling it back. To me, just a clerical error is a clerical error. And it's funny how in the front, and I really want your opinion on this one. In the front of the work diary page, it's got in there, like in the instruction section. For everyone who's got a work diary out there is about 36 pages of instructions you should read at the beginning. And
it's enough to do anyone's head in, frankly. It's
the instructions are actually very open-ended as well with some of them. But one of the things that they state in there is about, if the person's put down a town of, I think it says Sarah's put down the town of Gunawarra, but she misspells it as gonorrhea or something like that, something along those lines. And but the authorising officer knows that she means Gunawarra, so that's okay. So the intent was there.
Yes.
All right. But yet, if someone puts down the dates and the dates are sequential, but they've ticked Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and they've missed Tuesday, they've accidentally marked Monday. To me, that's the exact same thing, but they can get fined $880 for that.
Yeah. It's tough, the fines around work diaries.
Well, it is. And then the answer is, well, if you don't like it, you can take it to court. But not everyone wants to go to court over that.
No, they don't.
And if you're sending in for a review and they come back and say, sorry, we reviewed it, it still stands. And it's unrealistic. But I think that there needs to be some sort of a panel that could actually look at these things, who are maybe even if it was, they say, hey, we're going to use our NHVS auditors who might have a bit more industry background and can look and say, look, that's obviously easily happened. And obviously he's meant that or she's meant that. So just let that one go and put it down as a warning or something there. Because other things like work diary fines where you see someone get knocked off for not signing a page and they hardly used the work diary and it was 2 years earlier, that's got nothing to do with driver fatigue. Or
but that's the problem with any rules, isn't it? Because once the rule is there, you'll always get someone who wants to say that is a clerical error and that's not.
Yeah.
And so the problem with rules is rules are rules. And you know, if you take it to court, technically, you need to change the rule rather than the interpretation of it, because what you don't want is there being that kind of vague thing, well, he got off for that because some person thought that was administrative or clerical, but then the same person with a different, I guess, officer looking at it gets a different result, because one of the principles of fairness in law is that everyone gets the same treatment. And as soon as you start giving discretion, then you depart from that, and then you argument, not that the fine is unfair, but the way particular people have been treated is unfair.
Well, what we do see is that the NHVR inspectors are normally pretty lenient with that, and they just would say, mate, you've just missed a box back there, you just want to go back and mark it, and they're actually quite good about it. But the highway patrol are different, and they just go, no, you're breaking the law, mate, and they just knock them off for it there, and which is a little bit unfortunate, I think.
I also think it's tough because we struggle for drivers.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more likely to put people off than, you know, being personally responsible for some $880 fine because they want to drive their vehicles, and it doesn't take many of those fines before they're like, well, there are other things I could do with my life than
that's right.
than drive a truck.
Yeah, but also when they're pushing the mental health bit with drivers. And they're, you know, the NHVR's right behind healthy heads and all of that sort of thing there. And the police go and do coffee with a cop. But I don't know how many cups of Blend 43 in a foam cup the coppers need to give to a truck driver to settle him down after they've just knocked him off for, you know, $2,000 worth of clerical errors. So to me, it just seems a bit hypocritical. I just think that they could work a bit better. The guys are professional that are out there doing it. You can tell the ones that are rough. You can tell the vehicles that are rough. And I think that at times they're just barking up the wrong tree. And I can't change that. That's just how it is. But it just seems there is a fairness issue there. Where do you think we stand when you've got a driver has an incident, say he's had an accident, caused fatality or whatever, and he's got drugs in his system, ice, whatever else, but they still go back through and investigate the company and rip the company down to its knees. You know, like I understand chain of responsibility, but there's times, wouldn't you think that it just says, we're just going to stop it there. The driver's obviously done this, but it seems to allow them to open the door on a full investigation. From a legal perspective, can you sort of explain if that's justified or not? Because from me as a non-legal person...
So you just look at it and go, that can only be that person's fault.
Well, I realise that it can come down to a bit of training and that sort of thing. But if you get a driver who is on ice, okay, well, I'm just going to go to the extreme, and it's had a major incident there and has killed a few people in a car accident there, but they still can go through and do a 2-year investigation on the company and destroy the company with everything else that's totally unrelated to it and pull them apart. And even if the company comes out clean at the end, by the time they finish that 2-year investigation, the company's lost everything anyway. We've seen this happen firsthand.
You actually seen that?
Too right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I think that no matter what, if you're going to have an incident that involves a fatality, there's going to be an investigation. It's an inevitable consequence of that, because you're immediately, with justification, a regulator is going to want to understand what went wrong. And whether it is, just as you've said, it's one guy who completely without your knowledge on one particular day did the wrong thing, which is possible, or whether it's something bigger than that, or there's some breakdown in the system. And I think that if all it is that there's not necessarily an issue, because, like you said, you can't control. You're not there every single day. You can't test everyone before they step into a vehicle every single day. It's not possible.
That's right.
But I think that it still is incumbent on the regulator to go through the motions and work out what's gone wrong. Is it a failure of a system? Because there is that overriding duty to do everything reasonably practicable. And if you have done everything that's reasonably practicable, then there is nothing to see. by definition, an investigation is always going to involve work. It's always going to involve, I guess, an investment by the company concerned in going through that process. And it's always going to be awful. And I think anything that involves a fatality is just plain awful for everyone. It's terrible for the company, not just from the point of view of having to deal with all this. It's terrible because it's emotional and people knew that, like the people had relationships with the person who died. I mean, it's very distressing for everybody, even if you leave aside, any involvement by the regulator. It's catastrophic, often just for everybody.
Yeah. And truly. And no matter how it's happened. And probably, and my point being with that is that those investigations can take 2 years.
They can take a long
and
time.
The company comes out clean, but they're done, because they've lost contracts as a result of the investigation. Drivers who are getting constantly, and I'm going to use the word interrogated. It's probably the only word I can think of, but they're constantly, the regulators getting in touch, the investigators are getting in touch and constantly talking to the drivers. The drivers are going, mate, I'm done. I don't want to be here anymore. And so they walk away, and then they lose a few of them there, and then they eventually just lose their business over it. That's probably the thing, is the amount of time that it takes to go through. I mean, and with what we've done, we could go into a company, spend 2 or 3 weeks in there going through everything and turn around and say they're actually not too bad in what they're doing there. I don't think this is where the problem lies, but they tend to drag this on and on and on. And it's, it can often be an ugly outcome.
But that's kind of the law all over.
Yeah.
The same thing, people make the same complaint about litigation.
Okay.
Someone owes me money and we're having a dispute, and surely we just go and file a few court documents and 3 weeks later, some nice judge will give us a decision. It's not that simple. It's anything involving courts and litigation and law, and it just takes time and it costs money.
So just got no choice.
Yeah.
So that means that anyone who's out there is really running a risk if they're running a transport company, that they've got to have their ducks in a row, but they've still got to brace themselves if something happens.
Yeah.
Because we've even seen it with suicides, Gillian, where they get investigated when someone's dived underneath the front of the truck, and they're trying to find something there that they could implicate the company for.
Can I say one thing that I think sometimes operators aren't aware of, and that's that if you do get, for example, a notice to produce over an incident, or there is a regulatory investigation, sometimes you've actually got insurance cover for it. So the first thing I would tell someone who rings me that says they've got a note, like a what's clearly the beginning of a chain of responsibility primary duties investigation, is I'll say, ring your insurance broker. And they're like, what? I'm like, sometimes you've actually got statutory liability insurance. And statutory liability insurance, depending on which insurer you've got, may cover you for fines and penalties and for all your legal costs associated with investigations. And I find people don't even know they've got the cover, let alone that it might cover them for all of that. And sometimes that's the biggest single expense. It's all that kind of, I've got to keep consulting a lawyer about this notice, and I've got to attend interviews, and I don't know what to do. And all of that can potentially be funded by an insurance policy that you might not even know you've got.
I never knew that. And the other thing I have heard in line with that is your insurance broker needs to know if you're suddenly getting investigated.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are just dealing with it themselves, but the insurance company, if they find out too late.
Yes, they'll say you've prejudiced it. So to the extent that there's going to be a final penalty here, it's because of something you did or didn't do that you shouldn't have. And if we'd have known and we'd put our lawyers on it, then it might have turned out differently. So it's like anything that might potentially be covered by insurance. Don't jump in where angels fear to tread. Make the call. Make sure that you get that advice before you start launching in on what you plan to do in response.
Yeah. Golly, it's a minefield, isn't it? Because this is, I think, a little bit foreign to a lot of people
well, you don't
who are
want
out
to think
there doing
about
this.
it either.
No.
Like, it's not something you want to sort of imagine or have a plan for, because it feels like something that would be unthinkable. And none of us like thinking about. It's the same reason people don't do wills, because they go, I don't want to think about what happens when I'm gone.
Golly. Well, that's true also, but they all think that it's going to be amicable at the end. Yeah. And it's often not.
Yes. And look, there are companies that operate for 50 years and nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where sometimes it does. and you've just got to take a deep breath and come up with a plan for how you handle it.
Yeah, I think like compliance, and Brendan always says this, is it's a form of insurance.
Yes.
And the thing is that, insurance isn't compulsory, but compliance is. You have to have it. So if you don't have any sort of compliance in there at all, and it's quite clearly stated when you go onto the NHVR website, when you look at the safety management systems, when you go and have a look at heavy vehicle national law, you have to manage everyone in what they do.
Yes, you do, because that's part of your primary duty. You must do everything reasonably
That's correct. But it's funny how there's companies that don't. We went to a company years ago, mate. They're gone now, thank goodness. But they were fuel tankers. And I remember going in and talking to them, and they let the drivers run ridiculous hours. And the owner said to me, it's up to the driver to manage his own fatigue. But they were paying them at times 21-hour days. We walked away from there very, very quickly. But that's what they were doing. And the drivers were, their tracker was showing that they were doing their time, but their logbook was just showing the normal times, and they were paying them for the bigger times. And we're going, you have got to be joking. And I was surprised. But that people were out there doing that, because I just wouldn't believe people had run that gauntlet, but they did. But everyone's tracked too heavily now.
I was about to say one of the issues now is that people get excited about the idea that they're ticking a box by purchasing some very expensive in-vehicle management system, and then they can say, "Oh, clearly I'm invested in safety because I've spent all of this money," and then they don't look at the data.
Yes.
And then something goes wrong, and it's very easy now, with the benefit of all that technology, for a regulator to say, "Well, look, this has been going on." For the last 2 years, and you want some evidence? Well, we're just going to look at your own documents and your own data. So you're basically, it's an own goal. It's like you created the data that's going to be used to support the case against you.
Yeah. And it's that old thing also, well, it's a new thing, I should say, not an old thing now, but it's a new thing where the number plate recognition technology that the government has is they can pick you everywhere. And I don't think people realise, a lot of people don't realise how heavily they are tracked. And the computers themselves will pick you up before anybody else does. They don't even have to go look in, the computer will do it. We've seen that happen plenty of times where it will spit out a notice just saying, well, you've gotten from this point to this point.
Not possible if
you
were
couldn't have
doing
done it
speed
unless you're
limit.
speeding or you didn't stop.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And then you get the please explain come through and you can't answer it and it's all over.
Yep. Or you've got the please produce your work diaries, and then they say something completely different to where you were, because they know where you were.
It's a bit of a problem, that one too, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, that's been very interesting. Contracts. I think that people have got to look at it, and they have to engage someone such as yourself to put them together. Can you, just to give a ballpark to people so they know, can you tell us roughly what a contract can cost? Does it depend on the size of the organisation or?
No, not really. Sometimes it depends on how complicated the contract is. So normally if someone were to send me something, I can in about 10 minutes tell you how expensive it is. And the funny thing is, sometimes it's not related to how long it is, because sometimes the short ones are worse because they don't deal with anything they're supposed to deal with. So, for example, someone will be sent a contract that's supposed to be for transport, and it's quite clearly not. It's for goods. It's kind of like, you're warranting these goods for 12 months, and that, you're warranting that we'll get clear title to the goods. And it's kind of like, what is this? This is not even a transport contract. And so that's actually more expensive to fix than someone who's got a well-drafted contract that maybe has 5 or 6 provisions that need changing in it.
Yeah.
So once upon a time, you'd think, well, if it's up to 20 pages, it'd be this much. And if it's, 20 to 40 pages, it's just not that easy to be able to kind of put your finger on it.
Just on that and talking about the goods, have you got to be careful with what's put in there about your liability for the freight?
Absolutely. So one of the issues is that basically if you haven't got a contract at all, so let's suppose you're one of these handshake people, then you will be liable for anything that happens to those goods unless you can prove you weren't negligent. So in other words, the onus is on you to show if they were perfect when you picked them up and not perfect when you dropped them off. It's for you to show that happened through no fault of your own.
Right.
And the problem is if you haven't got a written agreement, number one, you don't usually know what those goods are worth. So it might turn out that the one accident you had was when you had $2 million worth of kit on the back, and you've got $500,000 worth of cover. So you've just got a $1.5 million hole. That's the first problem. The second problem is if you don't have a contract in place, then the really big risk is what's called consequential loss. So what I mean by that is you can be responsible not just for the value of those goods, but for them arriving or not arriving at the site. So if, for example, you're bringing something to a building site and they've got 3 cranes waiting there for those goods to arrive and they don't because you had a rollover and it was due to your negligence, and those cranes are $600 an hour each. So you got $1,800 an hour while they're standing there waiting for this thing to arrive. They're going to want that out of you as well, because it's foreseeable that if you didn't get it there, you knew it was to a construction site, that that they would be out of pocket and they want you to pay for that.
Yeah,
so if you
right.
haven't managed that risk in a contract somewhere, that's a major problem. It's a double major problem because you won't get insurance for that. Even if you have $1 million worth of cover and you've got an $800,000 piece of equipment that's been ruined, it's highly unlikely your insurer is going to say, oh, and yes, your policy covers another $500,000 worth of consequential loss, because there's always caps on how much consequential loss an insurer would be prepared to pay in that situation.
Yeah, okay. Have you noticed that insurance companies now will go and investigate if there's been an accident? The insurance company will investigate to have a look at the chain of responsibility to work out if they're going to reduce the amount of payment or not. Have you seen that? I have seen it happen, and I just didn't know if it was a common thing.
I haven't seen it. Do you mean in the sense of a claim for damage to the goods or a claim for damage to the vehicle?
The whole lot. The vehicle was hauling freight. It ran off the road and rolled down an embankment, and the driver survived it. But before the insurance company paid out the $1.9 million or whatever it was for the freight and the whole combination, they came and did an investigation under the chain of responsibility to see what was there as far as training went, as far as fatigue management went, and all of those sorts of things. And the more that they could, they reduced it.
That's really interesting. I haven't seen that exact thing happen, but what I would expect is sometimes in policy wordings it will say something like, it's an exclusion if the driver, for example, was illegally under the influence of alcohol, and the only way out of it then is if you can prove you didn't know or couldn't have known that he was under the influence, or that they won't pay if, for example, the load in question was outside legal limits. So there's often like fine print exclusions in insurance policies that basically say if you're operating illegally, then the insurer isn't required to pay. So I'm wondering whether it's that sort of thing.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. Yeah, we actually were involved with the company, and yeah, they did have an investigator come in on behalf of the insurance company, who was a bit like engaging us to go in there and have a look and see, well, are they actually managing their compliance properly or not?
See, I'm wondering whether that again isn't related to whether you're operating in breach of the law, and that might be a breach of the policy, because you will often see investigators no matter what, because what happens with insurance policies, if there's an accident, the insurer is going to want to get their money back if someone else was at fault. So, for example, if it's a 2-vehicle accident, they might want to work out whether the other driver actually caused the accident, because then they can pay you out and then effectively go the other driver's insurance company.
Yeah.
Or even, say, if it's a vehicle fire, they might want to understand, was it a fault in the vehicle? So then they can argue that to the extent they have to pay out for the vehicle damage, maybe the manufacturer should accept responsibility because there was a fault in the vehicle, or the person who repaired the vehicle was at fault because of something they did, 2 weeks before the accident, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I suppose that would be a thing if it, rather than just pay out
Yes.
an electrical fire.
Yes.
Or a truck catch you on fire and it might be a wheel bearing. They say, we want to go and have a look at your service regime.
Yes.
And when do you last service it? Do you check the
Yes.
wheel bearings and whatever else? Well, the thing's caught a light and you've lost the freight, you've lost everything.
Or like I said, it may be they just want to have a go at whoever was responsible for that. If it's not you, they'll say, well, there was negligence by the mechanic because this should have happened in that service, a week before the accident.
Yeah, right.
This wasn't tightened properly. Or
Have you ever seen mechanical workshops get sued when there has been an accident and someone has been fatally injured in that accident to turn around and say, well, that service wasn't completed properly or you don't have the paperwork. Because mechanics notoriously are pretty average when it comes to keeping records. And it's just because that's just not their thing. You know, we've dealt with a lot of mechanics and mechanical workshops over the time, and I think they're starting to get it a bit more now. But I've got some guys and they'd be the best mechanics you've ever seen there. But golly, when it comes to paperwork, it's not really their thing and they don't like having to do it. But how they tend to get missed a little bit, I suppose you'd say, and aren't really getting focused on, the trucking companies are. But how important is it, do you think, for a mechanical workshop to keep records? And
Bruce,
like the big
you're
one,
never going to get an argument from me about paperwork. That's what lawyers go for.
there you go. So
Short
therefore,
answer, yes.
having
paperwork.
a record, having their tick and flick sheets, because a lot of companies, when we go in and we'll say, well, what record have you got of the service that's been done? Oh, yeah, we've got the receipts. And all it will say is carried out an A service and here's the expendables that we used and there's the bill. We're going, well, what's in the A service? How do we know it's getting done properly?
Yes.
So the mechanics, I think, have to probably have a little bit more emphasis placed on their tick and flicks. So the big organisations, the dealerships are normally very switched on with that. But when you get the smaller family-owned mechanical workshops and they've got 3 trucking companies they look after.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily want to. It's just more work, but it's worth it, in my view, to have proper records. You're always going to be better off when there's proper records.
So if I owned a fleet of trucks, thank God I don't, but if I owned a fleet of trucks and I had a mechanic that was doing that work, I would want to go and sit down with that mechanic and say, show me what you're doing on your A, Bs and C services and you tell me what interims you think they should be done and why. That's probably the first thing that I'd be putting down and giving yourself a window. We always say especially with NHVAS, when we're going to do those audits, if you say you're going to do an A service at 10,000, you have to do it by 10,000. If you go over to 13,000, then it'll come back to you because they say, well, you're not servicing when you said you're going to do it. So they're better off to put down they're doing it at 15, but still aim for 10. And that way, if it's 12, you still look like you're over servicing it, not under servicing it, because they say it's got to be that or to manufacturer's specs.
Yes. So at least you're going by your own rules then.
Yeah. They say whatever rules you put in, that's what you need to do.
Yes.
We've got plenty of companies we've gone into and they don't even touch their trailers and they're hopeless at it. Oh, no, we just pull them in when we get a chance. So why are you putting down you're doing them at kilometres when you don't even have hub odometers on them and you're swapping trailers all the time? So, you want to put down you're doing it at a time limit there and at least grease it and have a look at it. But we've also seen companies, one was with a fatality where they were putting down they do them at manufacturer specs and that's all well and good. And the manufacturer spec, you should be dropping the oil. That's all they're interested in, the manufacturer. It isn't about servicing it, it's dropping the oil. But they say you've got to do it at 60,000 Ks and these guys at times were doing them at 65 and 70. And I said, well, that's the extreme and you're going over the extreme. So they're really bad.
It's not a good look.
It's not. And especially when you start having a look at how many defects they've received in that time and, there's just a pattern there. But they don't seem to worry about it. But yeah, the maintenance side is a concern for me because I think a lot of mechanics, not that they're purposely flying under the radar, but they're not focused on by the regulator until it's too late. And I think that they need to have as much concern about this and as much priority on this as what a transport company does. I think that they probably need to lift their game. We do have some that come to us and say we really need some help and they say we're kind of pushed aside. We don't really know what to do here.
Well, I guess that they're not traditionally part of where people look for problems. They probably haven't been subject to as much scrutiny.
Yeah. So have you ever had any experience with any that have been done personally or not? Anything that you could give as an example to sort of hit home a bit?
Oh, certainly there are examples out there of people getting themselves in trouble over maintenance, and I'd have to look up the details, Bruce, but wasn't there one in South Australia a few years ago where the operator got charged with manslaughter over an incident in Adelaide where brakes hadn't been serviced and I'm sure I'm not making this up there.
I think
and the actual operator
and it
had
ran away
complained.
down I can't remember the name of the hill, but
didn't it?
and
the
let go
driver
down
had
there.
complained just a few days or a few weeks beforehand and got told, oh, that's not on our agenda right now.
Oh, no, I know the one you're talking. It's not the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do know the one where the driver had been complaining. He was
Yeah.
told, just drive the truck.
Yeah, exactly.
And jumped in and drove it, and then that
It
happened
ran out
and he
of
couldn't
control.
pull it
Yeah,
up. Yeah,
yeah.
it was not the one I was thinking of. The one I was thinking about rolled over when it let go, but this one didn't roll over. I do remember the one you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
I
it does.
suppose.
It does happen, and it's a very scary thing to contemplate, and I can't imagine how you would escape liability, either even criminally, because it's not just if you're operating a transport business. We're not just talking about the heavy vehicle national law. You're also caught by workplace health and safety laws. You've got industrial manslaughter provisions. So it's not one regime only. We might have our requirements for safety under the heavy vehicle national law, but that's not the end of it. And a truck is a workplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got both really, and admittedly the duties are quite similar, but you've always got to think about the fact that it doesn't just start the moment you jump into a vehicle when you're running a business. It's your whole business that's subject to safety duties.
Yeah. Yeah. Golly, it's a minefield, isn't it?
It is. It is.
If you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the only way to really look after it is just keep as much control over it as you can and have as many systems in place, and training
Yes.
is imperative.
It is.
And written training.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. You want to be able to show that you need records to show that you've done everything reasonably practicable. Because that's your obligation.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you can prove it without records, frankly.
Okay. Well, look, we might leave it at that when it comes to contracts. Bristow Legal, you're based in Brisbane?
Yes.
Yes. So at least people know if they've got queries and want to look at this and want to brush up what they're doing, and even for you to go through what they've got there, and you'll tell them if it's a piece of rubbish or needs a few things added to it or whatever. Because I think you're a lot like us. You don't like or remove it. Yeah. You don't like changing the wheel, do you? That might be something that's pretty good, but I think it's good for people, if they do get a contract, to at least give it to someone and say, can you just read over this? We're about to be engaged. Can you just have a look and see if there's anything that I need to go back at these people with, rather than just sign? That's the main thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay. We're going to come back and have another little chat about a few other issues here, but as far as contracts go, that's been very insightful, Gillian. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.